The Browns have a need for speed. We'll talk about it coming up next in the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Myles Garrett, the latest player to be pulled over for speeding, and it's a concerning trend for the star pass rusher of the Browns. It's becoming increasingly more likely that the Browns will end up keeping 4 quarterbacks, and the top 3 matchups that I'll be watching during Browns and Eagles joint practices this week. I do want to thank you for being an everydayer with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you will find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends as well, and it's totally free to you. Just make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you get your podcasts, and of course at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also get involved in the show by sharing your thoughts on anything we discussed today in the comments section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And listen, on the surface, getting a speeding ticket is not that big of a deal. The same thing that I said back when Shidor Sanders was cited for 2 speeding tickets in the course of like 2 weeks applies here with Myles Garrett, who was cited for a ticket in the same stretch of road, by the way, where Shidor Sanders was cited for one of his 2 speeding tickets, leaving the team facility Saturday morning. They got back in the wee hours of the morning, driving home, gets caught speeding. And here's the thing, it's not a surprise that either player was ticketed there because there's a very notable and known, it's not something like it's a pretty known thing at this point that there's a increased police presence there, always looking to get people speeding. It's one of those things where everybody kind of knows it. So Myles at this point, being an 8-year veteran, he should certainly know that. Shidor's a little, he's new here. He might not have known. To at least be aware of that. Myles should know better. And Myles should really know better on a number of fronts because, and that's maybe the biggest issue here is Myles is a little bit different when we talk about how upset people should be by this and how big of a deal it really is. I am going to maintain getting a speeding ticket doesn't mean you're a bad person. Getting a speeding ticket doesn't have to be some indictment on your character where it's well, you're just, you're a terrible person because I'm not sitting here saying that at all. People get speeding tickets. I've gotten them. I reiterate what I said all back earlier in the summer when we had this conversation before. But the reason it's a little bit different with Myles is because there's a repetitive pattern here. He has been cited by I believe by what I discovered, 8 different times for speeding throughout his NFL career. I think the majority of those are here in Northeast Ohio. And so it's something that he continues to have be an issue. And the bigger thing too is everybody remembers that the crash he was involved in with his Porsche back in 2022 during the season. It was 2 weeks into the season. And he gets in this massive car accident, speeding, hits a fire hydrant, car gets absolutely destroyed, rolls over a few times, and him and a female passenger that were with him walked away unscathed. Largely, they did have to go to the hospital for non-life-threatening injuries, but it could have been a lot worse. He missed a week he missed a game after that, and then was back the following week. And he even talked about at the time that being a learning experience for him. Something that sort of, and he was younger in his career at that point. It was 3 years ago. He was only 5 years. People can sort of at least understand where it's hey, listen, this is a guy who's young, and young people sometimes do dumb things. I certainly did back in my day. But you felt like that was a turning point for Myles to, be careful with the way he drives and just in general. And then the pattern has kind of continued here where, not to say he didn't learn his lesson, but understanding how dangerous this can be if you're not careful. He learned that more than anybody ever has by coming away unscathed, and he was fortunate for that. And so it felt like that was kind of the lesson learned moment, and it doesn't seem like it's necessarily stuck with that, where he continues to have this be an issue where he's getting popped for speeding. Now, again, I speed all the time. I'm not saying, I've gotten tickets and I haven't necessarily learned my lesson either, but It is something that Myles for Myles specifically, it's like something that everyone's hyper aware of because of that accident in 2022. And I also think too, the other element of this with Myles is considered a leader on this team. And I've talked about this before. I think Myles is a leader to a point. Like when he speaks, his teammates listen. When he has a voice and a presence in that locker room that people respond to and respect. And so he does have that leadership quality about him to a degree. But he's also not like the rah-rah guy. He's not necessarily the guy who's going to like stand in the circle and get everybody fired up. Like he is a leader to a point. But like even Jimmy Haslam, owner of the team, challenged him this offseason after signing the massive contract that he did to, embrace and challenged him to be more of a leader with this team and really set the tone. And the easiest way that Myles can be, the leader on this team, if he doesn't want to be like rah-rah guy, which is, I don't think is really in his DNA, is to lead by example and do the right things on and off the field. And I think he largely does do that. I want to be clear here, but certainly, this speaks to somebody who hasn't necessarily learned that lesson and probably serves as like a disappointing sort of moment for the organization that did dole out a lot of money to him this offseason because they were anticipating, hey, this guy's going to take on even more. Again, the owner flat out challenged him. The owner of the team flat out challenged him to be a bigger leader. Now, Myles said that he doesn't necessarily feel like he has to do anything more than what he's already done to this point. I think on the field, he's 100% right. I think off the field, you can make the case that he have an even higher standard to uphold in the community because he is the face of this franchise without Nick Chubb here anymore and without a franchise quarterback to really lean on just yet. Maybe that becomes Shidor. I think there's some fairness there that he's going to be held to a higher standard, and that's fine. But yes, like it is a little bit more concerning with Myles because it's been now going on 9 years in this league where this is still sort of a problem for him. And he had the accident that was a very serious thing that, still is fresh in everybody's minds as an incident that should have maybe been a learning experience for him. And he's still out here making similar mistakes. Granted, he didn't crash, and that's the good news. I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill. I'm spending one segment on this and I'm moving on. But with great power, or in this case, with a great paycheck, comes great responsibility. And Myles knows that. He has talked about like understanding who he is, where he is, even if he doesn't feel like he has to do anything more, or he doesn't have to not be himself in terms of like the leadership role or quality that he has on this team. I can understand where he's coming from with that to a degree. Even if he doesn't feel that way, he knows that there's a lot of responsibility that comes with this. And every step of the way, whether it was Jimmy Haslam challenging him, whether it was Jim Schwartz saying, at the start of training camp that he expects Myles to have his best season yet because he got this massive payday. Like you get paid like that, you got to perform. And I think Myles will perform. That's the one thing you can always count on Myles for. But some of that performance also is, being a leader on a team, especially when you are in the position that Myles Garrett is in and knowing how good he is and knowing that he is the face of the franchise at this point. It's, you're expecting a little bit more from him. And so I think this is kind of a disappointing moment overall for him, even though it's not the end of the world. I don't think we have to sit here and rip on Myles. I don't think we have to sit here and say, he's a moron or he's an idiot. Like I'm not calling him names. I'm not doing any ad hominem attacks here. Like none of that. Like people make mistakes, people speed. It's fine. But I just think like the repetitiveness of the pattern that we're seeing here, where this has happened time and time again, and especially with the situation he had in 2022, where it felt like, okay, he's probably learned his lesson, to still see this being an issue, I do think is a little more concerning and more so disappointing than it even was with Shidor Sanders, who obviously is a young kid who, makes mistakes, and everybody does make mistakes, whether you're a kid or not. But I'm just saying, like, it's a little more, it's a little harder to look the other way with Myles because he should know better at this point. That's the main thing I'm trying to say. Keeping 4 quarterbacks seems more likely than ever. That's right. You can call me a flip-flopper if you want. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. My most competitive league is on Yahoo Fantasy. It's the most fun I have playing fantasy every year. Highly competitive, a lot of smack talk. So listen, my friends and I have enjoyed playing Yahoo Fantasy for years, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran, making your 1 millionth league. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout the month of August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's only one team left standing. This season is just around the corner. Now is the time to put your league together and give this new mode a try. Or if you're more into the classics, you can still play head-to-head private leagues or even join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, so I know even as recently as last week, I have tried to be in denial. I have been keeping four quarterbacks denier, if you will, that the Browns are going to actually keep four quarterbacks. I just did not believe it. I didn't think there's any way possible that this is going to happen. Frankly, it would be the wildest thing ever for a team to actually keep four quarterbacks on the active roster. But as this has played out and given some of the circumstances around it, it feels more likely than ever after this last week or so that they're going to end up keeping all four quarterbacks. I think for starters, the injuries threw a wrench into things in regards to how they're going to handle this. Kenny Pickett getting hurt, Dylan Gabriel getting hurt. You didn't get you're not going to get the evaluation that I think they wanted on Kenny Pickett. And I think we don't even know if he's going to participate in joint practices with the Eagles this week. Like it's still very much up in the air. Kevin Stefanski was very ominous as me. I don't know. He was very vague, which let's be honest. Kevin Stefanski's always very vague, but he was very unsure on what the future holds for Kenny Pickett in terms of this week. But he was limited again on Monday, just did 7-on-7s. They're trying to sort of play it safe with him, which I understand. But we still know how they felt about him as a whole, like how they felt about him as a player, why they traded for him. They felt like he had a legitimate shot to win the starting job. And so understanding that, like, I do think they, in an ideal world, want to keep Kenny Pickett around, especially understanding like this entire quarterback room is a very volatile situation in general. They don't know if Joe Flacco is going to make it through the whole season. He's probably not. Who do you go to next if you don't feel like your rookies are ready yet? Probably want to go to another veteran. So I think that plays into it a little bit here where they're like, hey, we can keep Kenny Pickett and know that we have him sort of waiting in the wings if we need to. But I think the injuries kind of derailed the initial plan because they wanted to get a better read on Kenny Pickett and what he brought to the table and if he could be their starting quarterback. And they're not going to get that now. And so I also think it throws a wrench into things just from a standpoint of like what his trade value really is without seeing him go through a preseason, right? Now there is some mystery there, which is the same reason the Browns traded for him, right? Like they traded for him from the Eagles because he did the old fashioned go to another team after a rough start to your career, cleanse yourself of the bad and go. And he was fortunate enough to play behind Jalen Hurts and go off to win a Super Bowl where it's like, okay, like the ultimate cleanse. And now you get a chance to sort of start fresh somewhere else. So there is still, I guess, sort of that lure where it's like maybe we can convince the team to give us some draft capital if you're the Browns to take this guy who we think had a chance to sort of turn his career around. And there's some mystery there, right? And maybe there is somebody out there who still wants a quarterback, especially if in the next couple of weeks here somebody gets hurt. There's almost always one, and so we'll see if that happens. But it feels like the Browns last year, but again, so you wonder if the injury nuked his trade stock a little bit. But here's the thing: like last year, and this has been my premise on keeping four all along. I've said I think they'll keep four on the initial 53 because they want to try to trade one, and it's the same thing they did last year, where they kept Tyler Huntley, and then everyone called their bluff and said, we're not biting. We're not going to give you draft capital for this guy. And they were like, okay. And they just ended up cutting him in the end. And so I think this year they're going to call everybody else's bluff. They're going to be like, all right, you think we're bluffing? Fine. We're going to keep 4. And everyone's going to be like, what in the actual hell? But I think that's probably what's going to happen here, because they're not going to budge on, we think we can get something back for one of these guys if we trade one. We've had a lot of quarterback injuries over the years where we could maybe use these quarterbacks to some degree just to get us through the season. And then it's just about like what type of package you can get once he's maybe back out there and a team gets really desperate, right? But I think they're weighing that. I think they understand like they might not be able to move one at the end of the. And here's the other thing with Pickett specifically, because I've kind of believed he was the odd man out that they would try to trade. You did trade a 5th round pick for him. And I know that that's not a lot in terms of draft capital, but it still is draft capital. And these teams value that stuff like gold. So like for them to just trade for him and then at the end of training camp be like, yeah, you know what, we're just going to cut him. It just doesn't seem like it'd be the way they would go about this. The only quarterback that would make sense to really cut would be Joe Flacco, but he's projecting right now to be your starter, so you can't do it. You just can't do it. And so I do think like because they traded for Pickett, now all of a sudden I'm rethinking maybe it's time to actually envision this team keeping all 4 and seeing what that looks like. I don't think the rookies are going anywhere. There's too much potential in their eyes with Dylan Gabriel, with everybody else's eyes with Shidor Sanders, and Andrew Berry loves, giving his draft picks time to sort of marinate a little bit and see what they can do. So I don't think the rookies are going anywhere. I don't know. Like it just feels like there's more and more as every day that goes by, it just feels more and more likely that they're going to keep all 4. And honestly, keeping 4 buys you some time to figure out what the hell you're going to do to get to 3 at some point, whether it's trade a guy, whether it's somebody gets hurt. And that's the other thing. This room could look very, very different a couple weeks into the season if Joe Flacco gets hurt or if Kenny Pickett gets hurt or whatever. Like you just don't know. And the way this team's dealt with quarterback injuries, it's fair to assume that they could see that happen again. It's been sort of an epidemic here in Cleveland with quarterbacks lately getting hurt. And then the other part of this is like where Deshaun fits into all this, because here's the thing. Fine, keeping 4 is outlandish, and a lot of people are going to think that they're silly for doing it, because again, I think this is the direction it's trending. But at the same time, you cannot possibly keep 5 quarterbacks on this roster. That would be the most asinine thing that I've ever seen. And we know that Deshaun Watson is working his way back. We know that Deshaun Watson, there was just a video posted yesterday on his social media of him like throwing now, and he's like really, and he's running again. Those are the 2 big updates, right? Like he's like really getting more into like actually playing quarterback again. And so, I mean, this could all go away with the Browns easily just being like, we're just not going to activate him when it's time to activate him. He'll miss the deadline. He'll revert back to the PUP list and he'll end the season there. And they could do that. They could certainly do that. I've wondered out loud if there's a conflict there with the players union. If they do that, if he's being told he's cleared to play and the team doctors are saying you're not, then you have a little bit of a dispute on your hands. So we'll have to see what that looks like. But you can't keep 5 quarterbacks. 4 is already crazy enough. 5 would just be incomprehensible. They can't do it. So however the Deshaun thing is going to get sorted out, right now he believes he's trending in the right direction to come back at some point, and we'll see if that becomes the case. But we'll have to see how the Browns handle that. It might be a non-issue because they might just decide, like I said, not to activate him. It might be something where maybe at that point in the season, you already have a quarterback injury, and then you can bring him back in and he'll be the 4th quarterback now all of a sudden. So there's options there. It's not something the Browns have to necessarily worry about starting the season week 1. And so for that reason, I think they will keep the 4. Yes, you can call me a flip-flopper if you want, but it just feels like reading the tea leaves here. Things have shifted over the last week or so for me and my thought process on this based on what the team is telling us and based on how they've kind of handled these quarterbacks and how they felt about them throughout this entire process and not necessarily getting the full evaluation that they assumed they were going to get or they wanted to get, frankly. So I think at this point, keeping 4 quarterbacks into the regular season is now becoming more of the reality than the pipe dream. And we'll see if it actually plays out that way. Joint practices with the Eagles start on Wednesday. I will have my latest episode for you after practice on Wednesday because it's a morning session. But what are the top 3 matchups I'll be watching at these joint practices? I will tell you that coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. August 26th is officially FanDuel Features Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your shot with an MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or maybe like the Browns, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. Maybe you've got your gut feeling on who's going to win the MVP this year. I'm kind of feeling Joe Burrow after the way he played a year ago, nearly dragging Cincinnati to the playoffs. They got some issues on defense, but maybe he can get the job done this time around and get them to the postseason and be in that conversation. Speaking of the playoffs, is this finally Buffalo's year to come through in the AFC, or is anyone even going to challenge and dethrone the Eagles? Place a futures bet on your favorite to win the championship as well. Visit the FanDuel app today to start planning your future bets now, because Futures Day is only one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. All right, so we have hyped up, rightfully so, these joint practices with the Philadelphia Eagles for a couple days now, or really a couple weeks now, and there is a sense that this is going to be the most pivotal portion of training camp that the Browns will experience this year. It's the reigning Super Bowl champs, really, really good team. We know how much the Browns just in general value these joint practices and getting the work in against another opponent other than yourselves. And to have it be this team specifically is a big deal because we know how good this team is. And they're fresh off a Super Bowl championship or Super Bowl. So, this is going to be sort of a coming of age moment type thing where we get a chance to really see what the Browns are going to bring to the table this year. You get it over the course of 2 days instead of one like last year. And some really, really good competition is going to sort of be brewing here. And so that sets the stage for what I think is kind of a fun topic of the top 3 matchups that I'm going to be paying attention to the most over the course of these next couple of days. Some of these are more broad. Some of these are probably more individual. But I think it's worth sort of noting these. And the first thing that comes to mind for me is simply this Browns offensive line against the Eagles defensive line. This Eagles defensive line we know is dominant, especially in the middle with Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. Those two guys are fantastic. But as a 3-4 defensive team, you have like a Zach Bond, you have a Nolan Smith Jr., you have other guys that sort of scare you there, and they were elite. They had some other players that are their depth on the defensive line is always great, and that's kind of why they're so good up front, because they just come in waves. It's how they took care of Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, was they just came in waves. They had a lot of fresh bodies out there, nothing that the Chiefs could really do about it, and it was a problem. And so because of how good that defensive line is, I am anticipating a really important matchup between like all those guys up front for the Browns versus all those guys in the trenches on the defensive side for the Eagles. How do they handle those guys? Are they able to move the football at all? Are they able to get some push and get the run game going? Because I think you saw some remnants that the run game was pretty good against Carolina in that preseason game. But it was also Carolina. Like, that defensive line is not the Eagles' defensive line. So this is going to be a chance to really show how if this offensive line has a chance to get back to dominance, back to prominence, doing the things that they did early on in Kevin Stefanski's tenure, and if they're able to get back to running the football as kind of their bread and butter, we're going to get a sense of that against this elite defensive line that the Eagles obviously boast and bring to the table. So I'm fascinated to watch just that matchup from a whole. I guess at a more individual level, like, what does Dwan Jones look like at your left tackle spot against an opposing team? I'll be paying close attention to that as well. But that's one of the first matchups that kind of comes to mind for me that I'll be paying, that I'll be hyper focused on, if you will. Another one for me, and this could, there's some individual matchups here that I want to see. But the Browns secondary against this Eagles wide receiving core, we know that this is an elite group with some of the receivers that they have with AJ Brown and obviously Devontae Smith kind of leading the charge there. I'm fascinated to see how Denzel Ward matches up with AJ Brown. I'm fascinated to see, and we don't know yet how involved Greg Newsome is going to be. He's still coming back from the shoulder issue that he sustained at practice last week before the team went to Carolina. It actually might have been over the weekend that he sustained the injury. I can't remember the exact day specifically, but he was like going up to break up a pass and he came down on his shoulder. And I don't know if that means he's going to participate in these or not. If he does, though, like, again, without MJ Emerson and knowing that there's some bigger shoes to fill and sort of a bigger role to fill for Greg Newsome, I want to see what he's able to do against another, like an elite receiving core like this that has two guys that can really kill you, can really burn you, and how they sort of go about managing that and trying to lock those guys down. We know Ward, what he brings to the table. We enjoy the matchups of Ward versus Jerry Jeudy when the Browns are just having their own practices. I can only imagine like Ward versus AJ Brown being must-see TV for these joint practices the next couple of days. So I'll be paying close attention to those. They'll do some one-on-one stuff for sure with those guys, and then they'll also obviously see each other a lot in team stuff, and we'll see what that looks like. And then the last one I was going to point to, I've talked so much about the Browns defensive line and how good I think that group is, how important it's going to be for that group to sort of carry the workload of the defense, but also to set the tone for this team in general if they're going to win more than people are giving them credit for, or more than people are expecting, I guess is a better way to put it. And so, but understanding like Mason Graham in particular as a rookie of this group, because the Eagles offensive line, just like the Eagles defensive line, is so damn good. Now, no Landon Dickerson, he's dealing with that knee issue. So that sort of, puts a little bit of a crack in the foundation of this Eagles offensive line and how good it is. But I'm not worried about Myles Garrett against any offensive line. He's Myles Garrett. He's going to be great. I'm curious a little bit on Alex Wright and Isaiah McGuire for sure. I've sort of followed them throughout all of camp. But the interior guys, Malik Collins, I'm going to have my eyes on. But even more than that, Mason Graham, because Mason was a beast against the Panthers. Like, he was getting double teamed. They were sort of focusing on him primarily as the guy they were going to try to take away. And he was still getting pushed into the backfield. He was still causing problems. But now you're going up against the Eagles, the defending Super Bowl champions, and their offensive line. How do you do? What does it look like? Are you able to still get that same push? Those are all things I'm going to be looking for with Mason. And obviously there's a Carson Schlesinger part of this as well. Like, what does he bring to the table behind Mason as those two guys kind of become anchor and foundational pieces in this defense, just in general. So I'll be watching both those guys pretty closely, obviously, and that's been a story throughout camp. But definitely the Mason Graham versus this offensive line is going to be a matchup worth keeping an eye on, because it's going to be a good test for him and a chance to sort of show he's ready to contribute and be an important part of this defense. Day one, snap one, so on and so forth. So those are the top three matchups I'll be watching at joint practices as I head to Philly here on Tuesday. And I'm excited. I'm excited to be there to cover it for you. We'll certainly have episodes for you, hoping to do maybe a joint podcast episode as well, which we'll get to. We'll talk about here at some point. Hopefully no fighting. We always like to see the fighting being at a minimum and avoided, but you never know in these situations, so we'll see. But in the meantime, I will have you covered down in Philly. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure Locked On Browns is your first listen every single day. And for your second listen, you can check out Locked On Bets, where betting experts Lee Sterling and Kevin Rogers have daily MLB locks and can't miss football futures. Or as always, you can keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. See you.